On the 28th of July 1941, the Irish legation to the French state in Vichy received a 2-page handwritten letter from an internment camp at Le Vernet, 55 kilometres south of Toulouse. The letter was from one Patrick Sweeney, who claimed to be a citizen of the Irish Free State, born on St. Patrick's Day 1915 in Doriel West, Ballycroy, County Mayo. Sweeney, who explained he had been interned in Le Vernet since December 1939, quote, for default of official papers, was comparatively modest in his requests. If it proved impossible to arrange his release, he wanted the Irish authorities to organise his transfer to another camp or, failing that, some food parcels. Sweeney explained that he was, quote, the only Irishman in the camp and seemed abandoned by all people. Most people here receive aid from some source. Remarkably, although he had been arrested almost 2 years before, this letter was the first inkling the Irish legation had that Sweeney was being held in Le Vernet, which the French used as a place of detention for foreign undesirables. According to a police report from December 1940, Sweeney had been arrested at his hotel in Paris on the 3rd of September 1939, the day World War II broke out, and condemned to 3 months' prison for stealing American Express traveller's checks for a value of $2,000. Sweeney was sent first to La Santé prison in Paris and then to Fresnes prison outside the city. Since he had no valid papers, Sweeney was taken from Fresnes to the transit camp set up for suspect foreigners at the Roland Garros tennis grounds and then on to Le Vernet in December 1939. A fellow detainee at both Roland Garros and Le Vernet was the Hungarian Jew Arthur Koestler. Sweeney apparently shared something else with Koestler. They had both been in Spain during the Civil War. Koestler, a correspondent for the Anti-Franco News Chronicle and a communist activist, was imprisoned by Franco's nationalists in Seville in early 1937, before being released as part of a prisoner exchange. But Sweeney's career in Spain is much less easy to piece together. The succinct police report of December 1940 mentions that, quote, he fought in Spain in the international brigades from September 1936 to January 1939. And another police report on the 25th of March 1941 states that Sweeney had left London in July 1936, quote, at the invitation of his brother, to fight for the Republican cause, and he was incorporated as a soldier first class in the 15th International Brigade before rising to the rank of captain. Captured, the Irishman was condemned to death on the 4th of June 1938, according to the report, but managed to escape, hiding in the countryside for 2 months before crossing into France. Despite the French police reports, actual proof of Sweeney's presence in Spain is very thin. It does not appear in the various lists of UK and Irish volunteers contained in the 545 collection of International Brigade papers held at the Russian State Archive, nor in the British Secret Service's list of persons who fought in Spain, drawn up at the time. Although one does find as Joseph, Patrick's middle name, Sweeney, marked as, quote, returned from fighting in International Brigades, 26th of May 1938. The account in the French police reports is also riddled with chronological inconsistencies. Le Vernet was a miserable place. In his book, The Scum of the Earth, Arthur Koestler writes that the camp was, quote, notoriously the worst in France as regards food, accommodation and hygiene. Vernet was even below the level of Nazi concentration camps. Thanks to influential friends in London, Koestler was released from Le Vernet in January 1940. By contrast, Patrick Sweeney, who had no such connections, was to languish in Le Vernet for 3 long years before facing other ordeals. In 1941, he was interviewed by a New York Times journalist who visited the camp, and his case was taken up by Mary Elmes, an Irish woman working for an American Quaker organisation in internment camps in southern France. Elmes wrote to the Irish legation in October 1941 to highlight Sweeney's plight and his claim to Irish nationality, stating that the Mayo man had, quote, previously, as a member of the International Brigades, spent 8 months at Gours. A stay in Gours, a French camp specifically established to deal with Spanish refugees, would be conclusive proof that Sweeney had fought in the Civil War. Alas, all records for that camp have been lost. In between petitioning various authorities and confusing them by using different names, nationalities, and even dates of birth, Sweeney was put to work as a medical orderly at the camp hospital, a position that allowed him sometimes to go on supervised trips outside the camp at Vernet, even as far as Toulouse, until suspicions that he was planning to escape caused him to be stripped of the job. While the Vichy authorities had no objection to Sweeney being repatriated, the Irish turned a deaf ear to his pleas for help. On the 22nd of June 1942, the Irish legation in Vichy wrote a 5-line letter to Sweeney to inform him that the legation, quote, cannot intervene on your behalf on the grounds that you are an Irish citizen. But at the same time, Irish officialdom made inquiries to find out who Patrick Sweeney actually was. One such inquiry was made to Jack Brent, secretary of the International Brigades Association, who merely replied that he had learned from an Englishman also interned at Vernet that an Irishman called Ginty was in the camp. Sweeney's family in Ballycroy said the only news they had was a letter from him, quote, stating that he was belonging to the army and was just then in hospital in France. Sweeney, or Ginty, himself never mentioned Spain in his voluminous correspondence with the legation, and it is telling that he was placed in Section A of Le Vernet, where common criminals were housed, rather than Section B, which was reserved for political prisoners. The Irish legation in Vichy sent another succinct letter to Sweeney in November 1942, stating that the Irish Department of External Affairs, quote, is not prepared to authorise any action by the legation, because Sweeney had been a member of the British Army and his family could not support him, while Sean Murphy, the Irish minister to Vichy, recalled that Sweeney had indeed knocked on the legation's back door in August 1939, seeking repatriation and armed with the story of having arrived in France from Jersey without a passport. Finally, however, the Irish authorities reluctantly agreed to issue Sweeney with a passport, because, most probably, the man imprisoned in Le Vernet was the Patrick Sweeney mentioned in the 1926 census as a 7-year-old boy living with his parents and grandfather in the townland of Bellavini near Ballycroy in Mayo. But when they wrote to him Le Vernet in spring 1943 to inform him, the letter was returned to sender with the mention "gone away." From further inquiries by the legation, it emerged that the French had handed Sweeney over to the Germans on the 8th of January 1943. The Vichy Ministry of the Interior refused to explain the reasons for this handover, but the French were surely eager to have one less mouth to feed, and the Germans more than willing to deal with somebody the French records showed was a veteran of the International Brigades. Sweeney next turns up at the start of 1944 in files for the WWII internment camp about 80 kilometers north of Paris. WWII was a transit point for prisoners set to be deported to concentration camps in the Reich or further east, so it is unlikely Sweeney spent more than a couple of months there. This means the year after he was plucked from Le Vernet is shrouded in mystery. Although one succinct report suggests that from Le Vernet he had been sent again to Fresnes prison in the Paris suburbs. On the 17th of January 1944, Sweeney was deported from WWII to Buchenwald concentration camp along with 1,946 others. Crowded into cattle trucks, the deportees received just one bowl of soup during the 2.5-day journey, with the train having to stop frequently because of repeated escape attempts. When he arrived in Germany, Sweeney was categorised as politisch Ihre, Irish political prisoner. He was probably put to work by the Germans and malnourished. The records show that Sweeney was repeatedly granted arrest and medical treatment for general feeblousness and rheumatic pain. His stay in Buchenwald was mercifully short, for in late July 1944, the Irishman was moved to a sub-camp for civilian internees in Kreuzburg, now Kluczbork in western Poland. Kreuzburg was liberated by the Soviets in February 1945, by which time Sweeney had been moved to Austria, where he was liberated by the Americans a couple of months later. Sweeney worked the rest of his life in England, for a time working on trawlers out of Fleetwood. He died in 1995 without ever apparently telling his entourage the details of his wartime adventures. Why Sweeney would have wanted to spin a story about having fought in the Spanish Civil War through the French is a mystery. Perhaps, along with the name of Patrick Ginty he invented for himself, it was a way to throw a spanner into French investigations into his misdeeds. If so, it cost him dearly.